Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Hi, I hope this is a quite an opinionated session, and based on my own experience, I hope that you will find useful content in that. I'm here to talk about frameworks. I'm sure that almost everyone who watches the session is familiar with at least one of these shiny frameworks or libraries. Today's JavaScript ecosystem is rich of features and libraries and tools and frameworks of all kinds and sizes. Some people think it's a bad thing. Most people I know think it's good. It looks like that everyone just loves using those. And I apologize for not mentioning the rest of the pack. As of today, these are the most well-known and popular. A few years ago, I was working on quite a different kind of a project. It was a high-end front-end trading application for the fintech industry. It had to be top performant, rich UI, high product expectation, and very strict technical requirements. And by strict, I mean that it had to be responsive because every millisecond of latency can impact trading decisions. It had to be very lightweight and in terms of traffic and bundle size or total overall JavaScript size, because we had limitations on the HTTP port of the networking. And it had to be extensible also for future requirements. So we had to create a very scalable design. And in addition, we also had regulations, very hard regulations on using open source libraries. So we had very little choice, if any at all. And just a few weeks later, the core of the application was ready to be shipped for the dev team, and features started to pack up rapidly and quickly. And I would like to share the insights I got from this, from like going naked in web development. No third party, no bundlers, no compilers. It's just me, the browser, and JavaScript. Hi, I'm Avichay Eyal. I work at Tikal Knowledge. It's a Tel Aviv-based software consultancy company. We specialize in providing full-stack services. Personally, I'm developing some open source projects, libraries, other tools focused on like the developer experience. I'm also a certified master of consology, which just means that I'm doing a lot of consologs. You can reach me through Twitter or Gmail anytime. This is my alias. You can also see some GitHub projects. Since this session has plenty of content to cover, we're probably going to have more questions in time. I encourage you to reach out. Feel free to tweet me. I'll do my best to answer as soon as possible. You can also use hashtag #NakedWebDev if you can. I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about framework. So let's talk about frameworks. Or to be more specific, I want to talk about what happens with the absence of a framework. What exactly is a framework, or what do I get from one, or why do we need frameworks for? So we all probably think that using frameworks, we get ready-made code, hopefully tested code, project structure, code conventions, utilities, tooling. The key feature, at least that's what I think, of working with a framework is having a safety net. And working inside frames and constraints provide us a feeling of safety and security. This is probably the main reason most projects prefer an all-in-one solution, or at least a stable ecosystem. But it's not all too good to be true, because all general-purpose frameworks and libraries have similar disadvantages. This is like maybe partial list of the disadvantages. When I think of most of the real-life use cases, I use only about 20% of the firepower of a framework. So a question, why do I need to take the rest of the 80% along with me? Just extra weight. And extra weight, I mean that, by extra weight, I mean that if I want to integrate with anything that is not part of the core of the framework, I need bridges, adapters, external tools, libraries, hooks, whatever. For example, React doesn't play nice with direct DOM manipulations because it has its dedicated virtual DOM. Angular is not happy with changes outside the ng zone. State management libraries requires custom adapters for every library. Just try to imagine using Redux on a React application without the React Redux bridge. it's painful. And also you have routers for Vue, routers for Angular, routers, plenty of routers, and they all do the same. Framework integration also with the living API, the changing API of the browser is also painful. And every time a new feature arrives or shipped to the browser, we probably need to start hacking away or wait for the community to save us. Until then, the feature can be on hold. So back to the story of building your own framework capabilities out of nothing. I'll try to break down in this session the technical features of a framework. And I'll try to demystify by showing some minimal code that does the trick. I'll focus on messaging or the publish-subscribe mechanism, some state management, dependency injection, or inversion of control, a word about component authoring, routing, and as a bonus, just a little trick how to pass environment variables to a client-side web app. Okay, let's start. Messaging or publish subscribe. This is like a crucial part of every software that has more than 2 modules because they need to communicate with each other. Obviously, a typical single-page application has plenty more modules. And since JavaScript is an event-driven runtime, every user interaction, every change in the DOM, every resolution of a promise or rejection of a promise, every viewport rendering, they all trigger something. They all dispatch events. Most of the browser's happenings are being dispatched as events using the browser's built-in binary code, which is fast and efficient and does not require you to create custom code for it. So an event is a message. It's just a message with extra data. And we can leverage the built-in native behavior of the JavaScript runtime on the browser by simply dispatching custom events. And to wrap things in a more publish-subscribe manner, I'll just show a little piece of code. And this approach, I mean, it has a very minimal code, and it relies on the browser's native event target API. And as a side note, just I would like to mention that if you would like faster implementation, but less memory efficient, there are other alternative approaches, for example, arrays of callbacks, etc. But I'm going to show how I wrap, for example, the event target as a publish-subscribe mechanism. One second, please. Okay, so let's see the messaging demo. And messaging. So for this example, I built a small counter that you can just add numbers to it or reset. So we have 2 types of events, like change the count or reset the counter. And I mean, the HTML may not be like super sophisticated, but basically I created an event bus. And when I click on some buttons, it just sends a message through the event bus with some value, like -2 or +2. And also there is a reset event. How do I create an event bus? This is the whole code for creating an event bus on your own. I create an element. I do not put it, I don't have to place it on a DOM. I don't have to do anything with it. Just a document, create element, and I get a reference to an element that lives only in the memory of the application. And then I just return some nice functionality around it to emit, and it's just a wrapper for the dispatch event. It creates a custom event so I can send data on it, and a listener on. And I return in exchange the remove listener function wrapped up, so you can just, as soon as you subscribe, you get an unsubscribe function. This is the publish subscribes classic mechanism built on top of the dispatch event. It's very simple to implement. It has very minimal code, and basically the core, the happening behind the scenes, is executed by the browser. So I don't have to do any real code around it because the browser vendors already done it for us. If you have questions, you can add them to the Q&A section, and I'll try to respond. Okay, Let's go back. Okay, the second feature, which is probably the most complicated one in this session, is the state management. Basically, state management, we have, of course, obviously solutions in the JavaScript ecosystem, like Redux that has actions being dispatched and it creates a new state and then it's flashed back into the app. It's a mutable state every time, like a disposable state. RxJS that creates subjects like mini states and wraps them as streams, or Mobix that has observables and you can create also actions and have reactions on changes in the observables. And the trick doing it on your own using the browser API is by either going to getters and setters or using object proxy, and I'll demo how to use a simple object proxy to create an observable. Now the trick is that if you create a proxy, then you can trap the set, the change any property in the object. And once you trap it, you can notify that something was changed using the messaging system that was built and that was described in the previous feature. So how do I create an observable out of it? This is state management, and I need state. Okay, so I use the messaging because I want to notify how to that something was changed. And for the example, I'm going to show that anytime I'm changing something in the state, for example, the state was changed. And I also added some log that I can know that I track changes like change in name and has a new value and change in the email. If I change the email, I will be notified that only the email was changed. How do I achieve that? Using the browser API. What I need to create is just a recursive proxy. Again, this is like the complicated part. I export create state function. It receives a target, probably a blank object if you want. It uses an event bus. By default, it creates a new event bus for every state it creates. And I pass a prefix, and I'll show you later on why do I pass this prefix. And the first detection is that we're actually proxying an object because I don't want to proxy. You cannot proxy primitives on non-objects, and I don't want to proxy functions. And also tagging objects with a weak set in order not to create second proxy for an object. So I'm creating the proxy. This is the handler of the proxy, and every time something is changed by the set function, what I'm doing is I'm checking if the value is a new value, and if it is a new value, then I'm creating a state out of the value. So if it's a primitive, it returns as is a primitive. But if it's an object, then I created substate of the previous parent state, but I'm using the same event bus. So every nesting changes along the way is still using the same bus of messaging that something was changing the state. And I then change the value. Okay, I'm just setting the value as the new value, and I'm emitting that something was changed. Also emitting that the path was changed. Now, why do I use the path for? Because I could create a listener for the name, or I could listen for a nested value. So in this example, I can even listen to properties that do not yet exist on the state. If I create nested with value 42, then I'm already listening to something that is not part of yet the state, but when it's going to be part of the state, I can respond to it. And as I can see in the log, the nested.value has a value, and also nested is a new object introduced. It's recursively, so it's going from bottoms up. Some property is, okay. I can also see that a new property was introduced into the state. By working with proxies, which are again native part of the browser, any modern browser supports it, and with like around 50 lines of code, I create a workable state management of the application. Okay. Another feature that is introduced in most frameworks is dependency injection. Now, dependency injection is a good practice because it allows you to isolate pieces of code and separate concerns or test your piece of code without being without running the whole application. And it also allows you to be more specific of what are the requirements of every piece of code. And Angular provides dependency injection with the compiler. The compiler detects the annotation and it creates an injector code for you, but you do need the Angular compiler to work flawlessly with injecting. React uses props or the context API, just passes the contexts or the props on to the sub component, and this is like classic injection. Or the composition API in Vue that you would like to inject like services or external resources. The trick I found useful for doing dependency injection in pure JavaScript is using class mixins. Now, a class mixin as opposed to an object mixin is that you extend a class that you do not know. It's a dynamic class. You don't care what the class is, but you extend it anyway. And this is a class mixin. And just in this example, just class that extends the base, and the base is an argument. So you can just extend anything and add functionality to the class. Now, by doing this trick, I can inject anything to any class. Just dependency injection, again, what the idea behind it is that you have code and the framework provides some factory that on runtime produces your requirements and inject them into your code, so it's available for you to use as a resource. And in JavaScript, if I go for the mixin, the class mixin, is that it enables me to like create, let's say, an animal class, and I can declare a furniture mixin, and I can, as a developer, choose to do something that is both animal and a furniture like this. It's possible in JavaScript. So class mixins, I'll show just on demo the code. Okay. So in this demo, I'm having a component that receives some idea, loads data from external resource, and shows the details. And the component is not loading the data itself. It's using a service, dedicated service to load the data, just like in every classic design project. So this is like the component. Let me close this one. This is like the user component, and it extends the dependency injection mixin of what? Of an HTML element, because I just love web components and it's just a simple web component. And every time I'm setting the user ID, I'm going to the service, which is injected into dependencies. There are a lot of ways to inject. So this is like a very simplified demonstration how to do it. I go to the dependencies, I go to the user service, and then I just render the data. How do I make sure that the user service is there in the dependencies object, in my instance dependencies object? Well, two things I need. I first need the mixin and I need an injector. And in order to do that, I need to define the user service as something that provides it. This is like the injector. That's what the Angular compiler does behind this in the scenes. And the mixin. The mixin itself is very simple. This is the whole code. Once something is defined in the registry or the injectors, I just need to provide it. And by extending the dependency injection class, okay, this function gets this user component class as the HTML element as a base class. It provides a class that extends HTML element, and then as a user, I extend this class. And on the constructor, I just iterate through all the inject static properties, and I provide them to the instance. It's very simple, and it works flawlessly. This way, the component has no code of loading the data, only using the dependency. Okay. Another feature, obviously, is component featuring, either going with JSX style or Angular style. I mean, Angular has its own template interpreter that it can do it on compile time, on runtime, ahead of time. React uses JSX, which is like a wrapper mechanism around React create class. Just takes an XML and parses it as objects. It's not very efficient in terms of memory. Vue has its own dedicated compiler. So you can author something that is, you write something that is pretty much like HTML, and you get a result that is something, a function that creates the actual HTML at runtime. And my idea of writing components is going web components. Now there are plenty of talks about web components, and I'm not going to focus how to write web components. If you want to pick some third-party solution to speed things up, like a lit element, which is very popular, they're all lightweight because they do not require too much code in order to work, or you can write your own components. Just for the example, this component is a very naive solution of how to write a component. It's the same code as shown before, only these times it shows something that the user service, no, the user component, it extends a base component instead of the HTML element. And the base component is very simple. The base component is something that extends HTML, and every time I'm changing an object, which I call a view model, it's just a decision. It's a very opinionated, just for the sake of the idea. Then I re-render myself. So the component itself just needs to do something with the view model and create something that returns an HTML instead. But this is not like the most efficient. If you do want to go be very efficient, work with either lit or create your own custom templating, which is not about 1 kilobyte of code. You don't have to go that way if you don't need to. Okay. So, as I said, it's a well-covered topic. I'm not going to focus on that, and the ecosystem is rich. Routing. Yep. Routing also is part of frameworks. Personally, I think that routing, I don't understand the big deal around routing, but people got used to clicking the back button and forward button when changing states inside the application. So in order not to reload the page, you work with routers. And I'm going to show you how to write your own router, very simple, in a very simple manner. All frameworks provide their own routers. I would like to present a browser API-based router, which just leverage the pop state event or hash change event. And I'm going to build a custom element that acts as a router outlet, so you can keep your code very declarative and simple. And the router basically just listens to the pop state event. Pop state event is triggered anytime every time the URL changes or the hash changes, or when you pushes a new state to the window using the history API. And the router outlet would be just a simple HTML element. that either could listen itself to pop state or be managed by an external router. And here's the little piece of code. Okay. So for the demo of the routing, I created like a home page, a settings page, a login page, an invalid page that also how can I treat something that does not exist on the app, like a 404 page. And also, let's say that I log in, I can also know that something happens and route back to another page. Okay. This is like the HTML part. It's very descriptive. It's native, obviously, because you just define a router outlet. You define the path you want to work with, and you define which component is going to be displayed for that path. And also, I created like a fallback path, like for unknown or unregistered paths, and I'm showing the 404 page. These are the components. The components are pretty simple. They just show, welcome set is logging, invalid page, etc. And the router does the trick. And here the navigation is just changing href. Now, the one trick that you need to know when you create routing is that you need to block the default route change event by using prevent default, because you don't because if you do that, the page will refresh and reload. So you have to wrap something in a like navigate event. And what I do is just I go to take the event, I go to the router and I navigate to that href. What is that router? This is the router. That's it. It's an object that listens to the pop state event and it handles the change. Every time the pop state is triggered, it handles the change. And what is handling the change does, I'm immediately trying to discover what is the current page. So if I have an event, I'm just triggering the prevent default because I don't want the page to refresh. And then I iterate in the DOM. I'm looking for all the router outlets. Okay, query select all router outlets. And the target outlet is the one that fits the path. The path name is this one, this part, invalid path, settings. This is the path name I get from the actual browser. And I just need to look for something, for some router outlet that the path matches. Now, obviously, you can write advanced patterns like parameter route variables and parameter and route params and etc. But this is like the simplified version. By the way, I have a more complicated version on GitHub. You can see that it adds about 15 lines of code. That's it. And once I find the target outlet, I clear all the outlets and I place the new component. And how do I determine the component? Because it's described right here. This one says the login page, this one says home page, this one says setting, and I can also change the theme from dark to white, whatever. This is the settings page. Every component is created and placed in the outlet. Very little piece of code that does it. And for the case I did not find the target outlet, this is like the fallback, the 404, then I'm looking for the error outlet, which has the path of asterisk. And for that, I just see if it exists, then it probably defines some component and does the same thing. And that's it. Also, I need the router to navigate to a new path. So I'm verifying that the new path is not the same path I'm already in because I don't want anything to happen. And then I'm just doing some simple window history push state. And that's it. The cycle goes back again. Looks for the DOM elements and filling the correct router outlet with the content. Okay. This is like a bonus little feature, environment variables. Now, when you work with a framework that has its own build tools, that you obviously create configuration files for development for staging mode, for production, for whatever environment you want to work on, because you might want to work with different servers or a different backend, or maybe using mock data, or just showing, I don't know, debug code, whatever. You can do that without the framework, and you don't have to rely on compiler. By the way, the examples you see are just JavaScript and HTML, no bundling, no nothing, just simple files. And I do want to pass parameters to the application, but I don't have Node.js involved in the process. And what the Webpack does, or the compilers does, is that whenever they detect a code that is accessing the process dot env dot whatever parameter you're looking for, it replaces it with the actual result of the code. It hard coded. It puts the actual value in the lookup of the accessor. But we don't have Node.js. And we can do this with a little trick. We can use the HTML meta tags to pass variables. And just like an example, I'm writing a meta name endpoint, and this is like the server. And I can do that and change it for environments by either, if I have a server or SSR, then it's very easy to do. Or if I am deploying and writing everything manually, then I need some sort of templating on the engine, on the HTML itself, just to write the correct values. And this is like a very small piece of code that is taking environment variables out of the HTML. Just example environment like this: what is the target deployment, or what is the API endpoint I want to work with. Git hash, build number, whatever I need to pass to the client is there. And this is the code. To do that, it's very simple. Okay, when I just wrapped it as a module, and I'm just taking the environment and how is it performed. I'm looking for something in the HTML. This is like the environment variables tag. It's a meta tag, so browser do not render it. And if it does not have the correct name, then also search engines do not ignore it and move on. And anyway, you do not pass security keys to the client side, so it's also safe. I mean, if you pass security keys to the client side, it's part of the code, so it's a problem anyway, so it's not part of the HTML. And the environment variable just looks for this meta tag, and look what I did. I just took the data dash name of the variable, and every HTML element has a dataset property, and the dataset property is automatically populated and being camel cased for JavaScript, just whenever in relation to the attributes. Data dash something is also appears as part of the dataset. So I'm just taking all the dataset and I'm extracting it into an object, and that's it. And the actual result is that if I added data dash target dash deployment, it is parsed as target deployment. So it's also convenient thing to do, and that's it. That's the whole piece of code. Okay. There are cons, obviously, going naked web dev, because it takes more time to start up the project, and you have no community to support and no documentation except the MDN, which is excellent documentation, and you have to like trial and error for everything you do. The maintenance is on you. If you have bugs, you are the only one needs to fix it. We also actually need to think and start designing, which sometimes we forget to do that when we work in ready-made frameworks. But there are also pros, many of pros. It's more flexible. You can cherry pick third-party code And I took this approach to the next projects on, and I found it very useful. So I don't have to get married with the framework. I can wrap it with native features. And if I want to use pieces of frameworks or other utilities, then I just cherry pick whatever I need. You get a stronger development team because the people who work on a naked project, naked web development, they also they are familiar with the product, but they're also familiar with how things work, and you become a better developer. It outperforms most libraries because it's minimal code. It's based on a binary executable runtime, which is provided by the vendors. So you don't create objects or if you're focused on consumption of memory or battery for your mobile device, then these things matter. It doesn't require parsing time. It loads very fast, and I want to relate to the idea of not bundling your project and creating everything using small files and serving your source code as your production code. If you use HTTP2 and gzip the content, and HTTP2 is also available on CDNs, and you gzip, then the difference between minified code and just gzip source code is very nearly irrelevant, and it's fun doing it on your own. And again, we actually need to think. We have a few minutes left for questions, and I'm here to answer. Okay, so reach me out, write questions. I'm here on the chat. I'll try to answer.